They never knew they had a father, until the Millionaire CEO showed up after their mother's death, and everything changed. Elizabeth had never meant to live a secret life, but 5 years ago, when she found out she was pregnant, she made a decision she believed was right, for herself, and for the twin girls growing inside her. She had walked away from everything, the fast-paced New York life, the haunting memory of the man she loved, and the fear that if he ever found out, he would try to control her world the way his family once tried to control hers. She moved to a quiet coastal town called Marigold Bay, a place so small it didn't even have a hospital, just a clinic with one doctor and 2 nurses who knew her by name. She changed her phone number, her apartment, even her last name. She didn't do it out of spite. She did it because she was terrified that if Alex Reeves ever found out he had children, daughters, his powerful parents would come for them, or worse, convince him to take them away. Life in Marigold Bay was simple, but not easy. Elizabeth worked 2 part-time jobs, mornings at the local bookstore and evenings cleaning rooms at a family-run inn by the sea. She barely made enough to cover rent and food, but somehow, she always managed to keep things together for her girls. Haley and Amber were the light in her life, identical in looks, both with wavy dark hair and their father's brilliant blue eyes, but so different in personality. Haley was the quiet one, always observing, drawing, asking questions beyond her years. Amber was the storm, loud, loving, full of wild energy that turned every room into a playground. Elizabeth never told them about Alex. When they asked where their daddy was, she would say he wasn't ready to be a father, and that it wasn't their fault. The answer always left a sadness in their eyes that Elizabeth could never fully erase. But how could she tell them the truth? That their father was a billionaire who had once loved her but was too surrounded by judgment, expectations, and pride to ever understand what their lives had become? Still, there were nights when she missed him so much it hurt to breathe. She would sit on the couch after the girls had fallen asleep, look at old photos buried deep on her phone, and wonder what might have happened if she had told him. Maybe he would have stepped up. Maybe he would have loved them. Or maybe, as she feared, his mother, the elegant and ruthless Eleanor Reeves, would have buried her in court and taken the children without hesitation. One chilly autumn evening, Elizabeth found herself unusually tired. She'd picked the girls up from daycare, made them dinner, and helped them into their pajamas. They wanted to read a new book before bed, but she felt dizzy, the room spinning faintly. She kissed their foreheads, told them they could sleep with their stuffed animals in her bed tonight, and promised a long story in the morning. She lay down for just a moment. That moment became forever. In the early hours of the morning, neighbors called emergency services when the twins were seen knocking on doors in their pajamas, barefoot and crying. Elizabeth never woke up. An undiagnosed heart condition had taken her silently in the night. At just 31 years old, her life was over. Haley and Amber, too young to grasp the permanence of death, kept asking the police officers when their mommy would wake up. With no listed next of kin, and no information about the girl's father, the county placed them temporarily into the foster system. They were frightened, confused, and refused to be separated from each other even for medical checks. Social workers searched her apartment and discovered a locked box at the bottom of a closet, which held a notarized letter labeled, "To be delivered only in the event of my death." Inside was a name and address that no one in town recognized: Alex Reeves, Manhattan. Billionaire. CEO. Father. The courier placed the envelope on Alex Reeves' marble desk late on a Wednesday afternoon, amid quarterly reports, investor updates, and a steaming cup of black coffee he had barely touched. The name on the corner of the envelope meant nothing to him at first, Elizabeth Carter, but the moment he opened it, the rest of his world fell away. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges, handwritten in ink that had smudged slightly, as if the writer's hands had trembled or tears had fallen onto the page. He read the first sentence 3 times before the meaning truly landed. "If you're reading this, Alex, it means I'm gone." His breath caught as he scanned the next lines, which unraveled the secret she had kept for 5 years. She spoke of their daughters, twins named Haley and Amber, how they looked like him, how they had his eyes. She wrote about why she had kept them from him, why she had left without a word. Her fears of his family, her fear of becoming a pawn in their elite world, her fear that love would not be enough to protect her children from the machine that controlled his life. She ended the letter with an address, a desperate request that if he could find it in himself to care, to forgive her, that he find them and keep them safe. Alex didn't move for a long time after finishing the letter. He sat back in his leather chair, blinds closed against the evening skyline of Manhattan, and pressed his palms to his face. His entire body buzzed with disbelief, with fury, with grief, with guilt. He remembered Elizabeth like a photograph left out in the rain, faded at the edges, impossible to forget. They had been together briefly, but intensely, years ago when she worked on a medical research team his company had funded. She was intelligent, stubborn, unwilling to play politics. They had bonded over long nights of data and passion that burned fast and bright. Then she disappeared. He had assumed she'd moved on, left the industry, tired of the pressure. He never imagined she had been carrying his children. He stood up so fast his chair tipped backward. Within an hour, his jet was being prepped. He cleared his schedule indefinitely, something he had never done in his life. His assistant tried to ask questions, but he cut her off with a single glance. For the first time in years, Alex Reeves wasn't operating as a CEO or public figure. He was operating as a man who had just discovered he had two daughters he had never met, and that their mother had died without him ever knowing the truth. He arrived in Marigold Bay the next morning under gray skies and sea wind. The town looked like something out of a faded postcard: quiet streets, small cafes, people who watched newcomers with polite suspicion. He went straight to the local family services office, heart pounding in his chest like a drum. They were cautious, as they should be. He had no proof yet. But when he showed the letter and his ID, and when he offered to submit to immediate DNA testing, things moved faster. While waiting for clearance, he learned more about the girls than he had ever expected to. The social worker, a tired but kind woman named Denise, told him the girls had been inconsolable for days. They wouldn't eat unless they were together. They barely spoke. They asked for their mother constantly, and refused to believe she wasn't coming back. Denise showed him a photo, two little girls with long dark curls and wide, frightened blue eyes that stopped Alex's heart. "They're not ready for strangers," Denise warned. "You need to go slow." But Alex couldn't breathe until he saw them. When he was finally allowed into the visitation room, the sight nearly brought him to his knees. Haley and Amber were huddled on a small sofa, identical in their fear and silence, gripping each other's hands tightly. Their faces were pale, their eyes rimmed with the red of too many tears. They didn't look up at him. They didn't recognize him. Why would they? He took a seat across from them, careful not to move too fast, his voice low and soft. "Hi," he said, unsure of what else to say to the children he never knew he had. "My name is Alex." The girls looked at each other first, then at him, wary and still. Neither spoke. Alex swallowed the knot in his throat and reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small plush bear, one that had sat on his office shelf for years, a strange relic from a trade show, one he had always kept without knowing why. He set it gently on the table. Amber finally moved, her little hand darting forward to grab the bear. Haley leaned against her sister's shoulder and whispered something only they could hear. Alex felt the sting behind his eyes and blinked quickly. He didn't expect a miracle. He didn't expect them to hug him, or call him daddy, or trust him with their hearts overnight. But he was there. And he wasn't going anywhere. As the visit ended and a caseworker escorted the girls back to their temporary room, Alex stood in the hallway, hands shaking. He realized that in a matter of hours, his entire identity had changed. He was no longer just a CEO. He was a father. And he would spend the rest of his life trying to earn that title from the daughters who didn't yet know what he meant to them, or what they meant to him. The next few days felt both painfully slow and overwhelmingly fast for Alex. While the DNA test results were being processed, he remained in Marigold Bay, renting a modest cottage near the edge of town, far from the polished steel and luxury of his Manhattan world. He didn't tell anyone where he was, not his assistant, not the board, not the press. For the first time in years, his name wasn't followed by headlines or expectations. He was simply a man trying to find a way into the lives of two little girls who had just lost everything. He visited the girls again the next afternoon. This time, they didn't look away when he entered. They were still silent, still glued to one another like mirrors trying to survive in a world that no longer made sense, but Amber reached for the plush bear on the table before she said a word. Alex smiled gently, not moving too close, and knelt by the table so he could be at their level. He brought coloring books, crayons, and 2 chocolate chip muffins from the local bakery, the kind he remembered Elizabeth used to love. He didn't try to talk too much, just sat with them, drawing beside them on the paper, even if his stick figures made Amber giggle under her breath. That sound, it hit him like sunlight breaking through a storm. Haley didn't speak, but she watched him carefully, her big blue eyes tracking every move. When the results came in, the caseworker called him to the office immediately. The envelope was handed to him without ceremony. The confirmation was there, in black and white, 99.9% probability. Alex Reeves was the biological father of Haley and Amber Carter. He stared at the paper for a long time, not because he doubted it, but because the reality of it shook something in him he hadn't expected. It wasn't just official. It was real now. No longer a letter or a theory. They were his children. But that didn't mean he could just take them home. The court required a custody hearing. Alex had to prove he could care for them emotionally and physically, that he could provide a stable environment. Despite his wealth and power, the process was rigorous. His past was scrutinized, his bachelor lifestyle, his long work hours, the absence of any parental history. Lawyers suggested he appoint a guardian, perhaps hire a live-in caretaker. But Alex refused. He was adamant that he would not outsource his fatherhood. He had already lost 5 years. He wouldn't lose another minute. In the meantime, the visits with the girls became a daily routine. They began to expect him. Amber ran to the window of the center when she saw his car. Haley still kept her distance, but she no longer hid behind her sister. They made puzzles, played with blocks, and once, they even convinced him to try peanut butter and jelly sandwiches with marshmallows, something Elizabeth used to make when they were having a rainy day celebration, as the girls called it. When he asked them what that meant, Amber said, "It's when you smile even though the sky cries." The words were simple, but they pierced him deeply. Each evening, he returned to the rented cottage, overwhelmed and raw. He lay awake at night thinking about Elizabeth. What she went through raising 2 children on her own. How many nights she cried in silence. How much courage it must have taken to keep them safe and love them without support. He read the letter she'd left him over and over until he knew every curve of her handwriting. He talked to her in the quiet, as if she could still hear him, telling her he would do better now, that he would protect them, that he was sorry for everything. The day of the hearing came quickly. He stood before the judge, dressed not in his usual expensive suit, but in a simple dark blazer and tie that felt more like who he was now. He spoke honestly, about his ignorance, his guilt, and the promise he now carried. He admitted he didn't know how to be a father yet, but said he was ready to learn with his whole heart. He didn't plead with money. He pleaded with intention. The court ruled in his favor, but under one condition: supervised transition. The girls would begin spending nights at his cottage under the observation of a child specialist. They would have to feel safe, stable, and connected before full custody would be approved. Alex accepted without hesitation. That evening, When he arrived at the center to pick them up, Amber ran to him with her backpack swinging wildly, yelling, "We get to sleep at your house tonight." Haley followed more slowly, clutching a small photo of their mother. She looked up at him and whispered, "Can I bring Mommy too?" Alex's voice broke as he knelt and opened his arms. "Of course, sweetheart," he said. "Mommy can come with us." And so they drove, quiet but together, toward the little house on the cliff where the wind carried the ocean and the future waited, uncertain, unpolished, but full of the kind of hope that only grows after everything else has fallen apart. The first night at the cottage was harder than Alex had anticipated. Despite the soft lighting, the shelves now lined with picture books, the freshly laundered sheets and twin beds dressed in matching pink quilts, the girls still clung to each other with wide, uncertain eyes. Amber seemed excited at first, bouncing from room to room, exclaiming that the place smelled like pancakes, but when the sun went down and the air turned quiet, even she fell silent. Haley was more withdrawn. She barely spoke, holding her mother's photo tightly as though afraid it might vanish in the dark. Alex had read somewhere that children process grief through patterns and comfort, and he tried to recreate what little he knew of their former life. He made mac and cheese the way Elizabeth once had, using elbow noodles and too much cheese. He let them brush their teeth with their own little timers and sang softly through the bathroom door when Amber refused to go in alone. At bedtime, they asked for the same story Elizabeth used to read, a battered copy of The Velveteen Rabbit found in their belongings. His voice trembled through the pages, the story as much for himself as for them. After they finally fell asleep in the same bed, curled up like twin commas under one blanket, Alex sat alone in the hallway, listening. He had never known such silence could feel so loud. He wanted to do everything right, but he already doubted himself. He didn't know their routines, their fears, or their habits. He wasn't even sure if he should kiss their foreheads or wait for them to offer affection first. He looked down at his hands, once capable of closing multi-million-dollar deals without blinking, now trembling because he couldn't tell if his daughters had eaten enough dinner. The next morning brought some relief. The girls woke early, and Amber immediately asked for pancakes. Haley hovered behind her, rubbing her eyes but following her lead. Alex had practiced making pancakes the night before using a video tutorial, and he managed to avoid burning most of them. The girls sat at the counter in their pajamas, legs swinging, syrup dripping from their forks. It was the first time he heard them laugh together since they'd arrived. It was a sound he wanted to bottle and keep forever. They spent the day exploring the backyard. Amber chased butterflies while Haley collected smooth stones along the garden path. Alex stayed close but let them lead, learning their rhythms, how Amber talked non-stop when she was nervous, how Haley needed quiet and space before she could open up. When they came across an old hammock, Alex lifted both girls in and sat beside them as they rocked slowly under the open sky. Amber fell asleep mid-sentence, one hand on his shoulder. Haley didn't sleep but leaned into his side and whispered, "Mommy used to do this with us." Alex nodded, unable to speak, and put his arm gently around her. That night, when the social worker came by for the check-in, she found the girls playing in the living room while Alex tried to braid Amber's hair, his fingers clumsy and slow. Haley was organizing picture books by color, and Amber was giving him strict instructions like a small general. The worker smiled. "They seem safe here," she said quietly. Alex didn't answer. He didn't want to say too much and ruin the fragile thing they were building. Later, after the girls had fallen asleep again, this time in their own beds, though still within arm's reach of one another, he sat by the fireplace reading Elizabeth's letter again. It was worn now, creased and fingerprinted. She had written about their favorite songs, their silly phrases, the way Amber said, "straw babies," instead of strawberries. She had begged him not to be angry, to forgive her, and to love them even if he couldn't love her anymore. He ran his hand over the words slowly, then folded the letter back into its envelope and placed it in a box beside their storybooks. In the days that followed, the cottage transformed. It became a place of crayons on the walls, tiny shoes by the door, and spilled cereal on the floor. Alex traded conference calls for nap schedules and boardroom meetings for ballet cartoons. Every mistake he made, putting Amber's shirt on backward, accidentally giving Haley 2 left socks, was met not with judgment, but with hesitant giggles that slowly warmed. And then, one evening, Haley called out to him after lights out. "Daddy," she said into the dark. He stopped in the hallway, heart caught in his chest. "Yes, sweetheart," he replied. There was a pause. "Can you sing that story again?" It didn't matter that he didn't sing well, or that he forgot half the lyrics. What mattered was that she asked. What mattered was that he was there. And just like that, the house stopped feeling like a guest house and started feeling like home. The following weeks unfolded with a rhythm that was as exhausting as it was extraordinary. Every morning began with tiny footsteps racing across the wooden floors of the cottage, a burst of energy that jolted Alex from sleep before the sun had fully risen. He no longer needed an alarm clock. Instead, he was greeted by 2 messy-haired girls eager for breakfast, a morning cuddle, or to inform him, often urgently, that Amber's favorite headband had disappeared again or that Haley's stuffed bunny needed surgery due to an injury sustained during the night. These small crises filled the air with noise and life, and though he was running on less sleep than ever before, Alex had never felt more awake. The initial supervised visits transitioned into full-day stays, and soon after, the court granted him temporary custody with an in-home counselor assigned to monitor the transition. Her name was Lauren, and she visited once a week, observing quietly, taking notes, occasionally engaging with the girls while Alex sat nervously, always worried he was doing something wrong. But Lauren's reports remained positive. She noted the way Haley gradually moved from shadows into sunlight, how Amber's temper tantrums lessened as she began to trust the new structure of their world. Most importantly, she documented how both girls referred to Alex more and more as "Daddy," sometimes by accident, sometimes with intention. Still, there were setbacks. Haley had frequent nightmares that left her screaming in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, gasping for her mother. The first time it happened, Alex panicked, unsure whether to call an ambulance or try to wake her. He ended up rocking her back and forth on the edge of her bed until her sobs turned to sniffles and then to sleep. She didn't speak about the dreams the next day, but she curled up in his lap without a word, and he wrapped his arms around her tightly, silently wishing he could protect her from everything, even memories. Amber, on the other hand, was prone to bursts of anger she didn't know how to explain. One afternoon, when Alex said she couldn't have a second popsicle before dinner, she screamed and threw it across the room. It hit the wall and slid down in a slow, sticky trail. Alex didn't yell. He picked up the mess and knelt beside her as she sobbed into the carpet. "I'm mad because Mommy isn't here," she finally whispered. It was the first time she had said those words. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he sat with her for a long time and said softly, "I know. I miss her too." Outside of their emotional storms, the girls began to thrive. They discovered favorite spots in the cottage, a sunlit corner by the window where they built pillow forts, a shady patch under the big oak tree in the backyard where they hosted tea parties for imaginary guests, and a stretch of hallway perfect for sock-sliding races. Alex bought them scooters and helmets, tiny gardening gloves for the flower bed, and a little chalkboard for learning letters. He enrolled them in a local preschool, and on the first day, he stood outside the door long after they had gone in, staring through the glass and wondering how parents ever got used to letting go. As he got to know them, Alex realized how much of Elizabeth lived on in them. Amber's loud laugh and sharp wit mirrored her mother's playful sarcasm, while Haley's quiet observations and need for order echoed Elizabeth's deep introspection. He kept the girls' routine simple, consistent mealtimes, reading before bed, walks to the beach on Sunday afternoons. But he also created space for laughter. They had dance parties in the living room, built towers out of cereal boxes, and even once turned the bathroom into a pirate ship using only towels, a mop, and imagination. And yet, through all of it, Alex often thought of Elizabeth, not just with grief, but with awe. How had she managed this alone? He had help now, a counselor, a pediatrician, even the occasional advice from local parents he met at preschool drop-off. Elizabeth had none of that. She had built a life for these girls out of nothing but her own willpower, and he respected her more with each passing day. One afternoon, as he folded tiny socks in the laundry room, Haley wandered in with a serious expression. She held a drawing in her hands, stick figures of herself, Amber, their mom, and Alex. Above them, she'd drawn a big yellow sun and the word, home, in large, careful letters. She handed it to him silently, then turned to leave. But at the door, she stopped and said, almost shyly, "Mommy would like you." Alex felt his throat tighten. He nodded slowly, blinking hard. "I hope so," he whispered, once she had gone. It was a small moment. But for Alex, it was everything. It meant they were no longer just surviving. They were beginning to heal. Word eventually got out. In a town as small as Marigold Bay, secrets didn't last forever, especially not when they involved a billionaire CEO suddenly becoming a full-time father to 5-year-old twin girls. At first it was just whispers at the preschool gate and curious glances at the grocery store. But it didn't take long before local papers picked up the story and, soon after, national media followed. Someone connected the dots, someone always did, and within days Alex's photo was on headlines again, this time not for acquisitions or pharmaceutical breakthroughs, but for something far more human. From boardroom to bedtime stories, one headline read, complete with a candid photo of Alex pushing a shopping cart with Amber sitting cross-legged in the front and Haley clinging to his hand. Alex had been expecting it, but that didn't make it easier. He was no stranger to publicity, but this time was different. This time the story wasn't about business. It was about his daughters, 2 little girls who had already lost their mother, who were just beginning to feel safe again. He didn't want them to become a spectacle. But controlling a narrative was much harder when it involved children and vulnerability. He had lawyers send polite cease and desist letters. He reinforced security measures around the cottage. But the attention didn't fully die down. Then came the call he'd been dreading. His mother. She hadn't spoken to him since she found out about the girls. In fact, she had been completely silent, as if ignoring their existence might make them go away. But now, with the media storm rising, she reached out. The call was brief. She wanted to visit. Alex knew better than to think she was coming out of kindness. Still, he agreed, on his terms. When she arrived, dressed in pristine white and smelling like her usual designer perfume, Haley and Amber were outside, playing hopscotch on the patio. They looked up curiously but didn't run to her. His mother had brought gifts, of course, too expensive, too impersonal. A tablet for each of them, matching handbags, things they didn't even know how to use. Amber tilted her head and asked, "Why did you bring us these?" His mother smiled tightly, kneeling awkwardly in her heels. "Because I'm your grandmother." The word hung in the air, unfamiliar and cold. Haley clutched Alex's hand. Inside, while the girls played in another room, Alex and his mother sat across from each other like 2 opposing sides of a very old war. She didn't waste time. She asked if he was really planning to raise them here, in this shack, as she called it. She questioned their stability, their future, their impact on his reputation. She suggested he send them to a quiet boarding school until they were older. Alex didn't raise his voice. He just looked at her and said, very clearly, that if she couldn't see them as people, as family, then she would have no place in their lives. She left not long after, and didn't look back at the girls when she passed them. That night, Alex told the girls that sometimes, family doesn't look how you expect. That sometimes people who are supposed to love you don't know how. Haley looked up and said, "Like how Mommy used to cry when no one called her back." Alex nodded slowly and hugged her close. The days after that were quieter. The press moved on. His mother stopped calling. The girls returned to their routines. But something had changed in Alex. He realized he had always been shaped by expectation, what kind of man he should be, what kind of father he could never become. But here, with syrup stains on his shirts and glitter glue on his fingers, he was more himself than he had ever been in a boardroom. One evening, as he helped Amber with a puzzle and Haley colored quietly beside them, he glanced at the old photo on the bookshelf, the only one he had of Elizabeth, taken years ago, when she was laughing at something off camera. It had become a fixture in their living room, a soft reminder of the woman who had given him everything, even if it had come in pieces. He wished she could see them now. He wished she could see that, against every odd, they were doing okay. Haley looked up suddenly and said, "You're better at puzzles now." Amber nodded and added, "And your pancakes aren't burnt anymore." Alex laughed, not just because it was true, but because it felt like a milestone. They weren't just healing, they were beginning to belong to each other. The grief wasn't gone. The questions hadn't all been answered. But for the first time, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something they could build, one imperfect piece at a time. Fall arrived slowly in Marigold Bay, painting the streets with amber leaves and pulling a gentle chill into the ocean wind. The girls had started school by then, and each morning Alex packed their lunches with an awkward care that only fathers newly inducted into the chaos of parenting could understand. Peanut butter sandwiches were cut into stars, apple slices never browned thanks to lemon juice, and there was always a tiny note folded inside that read something silly or kind. "Today is a good day to make a new friend. Don't forget how brave you are. Yes, Amber, I remembered to bring your purple marker home." He began to take real joy in these rituals, learning what made them smile and what made them nervous. Amber loved show and tell days but hated math. Haley was quiet but sharp, often finishing her worksheets early so she could help her classmates. Alex had started volunteering at the school on Fridays, reading picture books aloud in the library. He wore his best sweater and tried not to sound too robotic when doing character voices. The first time he did it, Amber beamed like her dad was a superhero, and Haley, shyly seated in the back, whispered to her teacher, "That's my daddy." Moments like those chipped away at the parts of him that still felt like a stranger in this life. He hadn't forgotten who he used to be, but it was beginning to matter less and less. One chilly weekend, Alex took the girls on their first big trip, a visit to a wildlife sanctuary about an hour away. It was part learning experience, part escape, and part test of his abilities to manage twin 5-year-olds in a place with real animals and no fences. Amber insisted on seeing the owls first and asked 100 questions about their sleeping habits. Haley preferred the giraffes and stood for 10 minutes watching one nibble leaves from a tall branch. They laughed so hard during a bird show that Alex thought for a moment he'd never heard a better sound. On the ride home, the girls slept tangled in their seatbelts, heads bumping together, and Alex looked at them through the rearview mirror, struck by how natural it all felt now. They were no longer just the children he had missed, they were the children he knew. But that same night, when they got home, something unexpected happened. He opened the mailbox and found a thick manila envelope from his lawyer. Inside was the final custody paperwork. The court had approved full and permanent custody of Haley and Amber Reeves. No more supervision. No more conditions. It was official, he was their father in every way the law could define. He stared at the document in stunned silence, overwhelmed with relief, and then with something heavier. Gratitude, perhaps. Or the quiet weight of knowing that from now on, there would be no one else to carry the responsibility. This was his life, and he had chosen it completely. He didn't tell the girls right away. Instead, he waited until Sunday, when they were gathered around the fireplace with cocoa and storybooks scattered across the rug. He pulled the papers out of a folder and sat them between his daughters. They didn't understand the legal jargon, but when he said, "This means you're mine forever now," Amber gasped and launched herself into his arms. Haley looked at him with big, questioning eyes, and whispered, "You won't ever leave?" He held her tight and said, "Never. I promise." That night, they fell asleep on the couch, each curled against him, and he stayed there, listening to their soft breathing and the fire's quiet crackle, unwilling to move, unwilling to break the spell of peace. In the following days, things began to settle into a new kind of normal. Alex started setting long-term routines. He met with child psychologists to better understand their needs. He joined a local parents group, something he once would have laughed at, and found surprising comfort in their chaotic stories. He spoke less often to his colleagues in Manhattan, only checking in when absolutely necessary. He handed off most of his CEO duties to a trusted partner, announcing a quiet but indefinite leave of absence. Some board members protested. Shareholders asked questions. But Alex didn't care. His daughters came first now. Everything else was background noise. One night, as the three of them played a board game at the kitchen table, Haley looked up and said, "When I grow up, I want to help people like Mommy did." Amber nodded seriously. "And I'll build a house with 100 bedrooms, so no kid ever has to be sad alone." Alex smiled, but something in him ached too. He realized they were still grieving in their own ways, turning memories into purpose, loss into love. It was a strength he hadn't expected from children so young. They had found a way to carry their mother with them, even as they built something new. Later that night, after he tucked them in, Alex sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched the wind shake the leaves from the trees. Life had changed so profoundly, yet so quietly. No grand announcements. No dramatic transformations. Just small steps, stitched together day by day. And in those quiet moments, he knew something with absolute clarity: he hadn't saved them. They had saved him. Spring came early to Marigold Bay that year, brushing the coastline with warmth and coaxing daffodils up through the thawing soil. The girls had started leaving their jackets behind and racing barefoot through the back garden before breakfast, their hair wild in the breeze, their giggles breaking open the quiet mornings like sunlight through clouds. Alex would stand at the kitchen sink, watching them through the window while drying dishes or pouring cereal, still half in disbelief that this was his life now, not as a temporary detour, but as something permanent and entirely real. The rhythm of their days had grown so familiar it almost startled him. He now knew that Haley preferred her apple slices with cinnamon and would not touch them otherwise, that Amber insisted her socks had to match her mood and refused to explain how that worked, and that both girls secretly liked to be tucked in twice at night, once when they went to bed and again when they thought he'd forgotten. But more than anything, he had begun to learn what it meant to truly be a parent. It wasn't in the big moments, the birthday parties or report cards or court rulings. It was in brushing tangled hair gently after a nightmare. In learning the difference between a quiet child who needed space and one who was hurting but couldn't say it out loud. In sitting through endless explanations about dinosaurs and sea turtles and not tuning out even once. One Saturday afternoon, Alex took the girls on a trip to a nearby nature preserve where Elizabeth used to volunteer. It was a place she had mentioned in her letter, one of her favorites, and though he hadn't been ready before, he felt now that they were. They walked the trails together, the girls bouncing ahead, pointing at moss-covered logs and birds overhead. He carried a small backpack filled with snacks and water bottles and the battered journal Elizabeth had kept, the one the caseworker had given him along with her final letter. He hadn't opened it until now. They found a quiet bench near a patch of early blooming wildflowers. Amber stretched out in the grass and made shapes from clouds, while Haley sat next to Alex and traced the edges of the journal with her finger. "Is that Mommy's?" she asked, not like she was unsure, but like she was ready. Alex nodded. "Do you want me to read some of it to you?" She said nothing, only leaned her head against his arm. He opened the first page and began. Elizabeth had written about everything, little entries full of humor and heartbreak. Notes about the twins' first words, Amber's tantrums at bath time, Haley's fascination with shadows, and the way they both clung to each other at night. But woven into it all were thoughts about Alex. Regrets. Hopes. Fears. And above all, a quiet plea, that he would find them one day and that he would love them as she had, with patience, with honesty, without conditions. He didn't cry while reading, not then. But something shifted inside him as he turned the final page. He wasn't mourning anymore. He was remembering. Honoring. Carrying her forward. The girls didn't ask many questions afterward. They simply sat closer, as if some invisible thread had pulled them all tighter together. Back at the cottage that evening, they decided to plant a small flower garden in Elizabeth's memory. Haley drew a sign that read "Mommy's Wildflowers" in purple crayon, and Amber insisted they plant them in the shape of a heart. Alex dug the soil, the girls placed the seeds, and by the time the sun dipped behind the trees, the garden bed was covered in tiny hopeful mounds. They stood silently for a moment, hands dirty, faces pink from the wind, and Haley whispered, "Now she's here too." The next few weeks passed in a golden blur of routine and small surprises. The girls each made a new friend at school. Alex was invited to his first parent-teacher conference, where he was told that both Haley and Amber were thriving academically and socially. He helped them write their end-of-year stories, and both insisted on drawing family portraits with him at the center. The pictures were messy, covered in stickers and glitter, but he framed them and hung them in the hallway like masterpieces. And then, one night, something happened that marked a turning point he hadn't expected. As he was reading bedtime stories, Amber suddenly interrupted him mid-sentence and said, "Daddy, do you think Mommy can see us?" Alex looked up from the book, heart thudding, and met her eyes. "I think she sees you every day," he said gently. "She's probably really proud of you." Haley, quiet on the other side of the bed, added, "And you too." Alex smiled. "I hope so." After they were asleep, he sat by the fireplace and thought about the road they had traveled. It hadn't been smooth. There had been moments of doubt, of exhaustion, of fear that he wasn't enough. But here, in this quiet house by the sea, filled with laughter and messy drawings and tiny socks always missing their match, he had found something he never thought he wanted, something far more meaningful than any title or fortune. He had found the kind of love that heals not just others, but yourself. And as the wind stirred through the open window, carrying the scent of the first blooming wildflowers, Alex realized something simple but true. They were a family, not because of blood or documents or tragedy, but because they had chosen each other. Day after day, choice after choice. They were imperfect and real and healing together. That was more than enough. This story ends not with a grand twist, but with something far more powerful: quiet, earned belonging. The transformation of Alex from a distant, high-powered CEO into a present, deeply devoted father is the emotional spine of this journey, and it feels deeply human. It's not a fantasy, it's a story of brokenness, mistakes, second chances, and the slow rebuilding of trust and love. What makes the ending truly satisfying is that it doesn't erase the pain or loss. Elizabeth is still gone. The trauma in the girls' hearts isn't magically healed. But in the middle of all that sorrow, Alex steps up, not because it's easy, but because it's right. He doesn't replace their mother, he honors her. He doesn't pretend to be perfect, he shows up anyway. That is real heroism. To me, the beauty of the ending lies in its simplicity. There's no dramatic rescue or courtroom battle, just a man sitting by a fire, holding his daughters close, knowing he's finally home. It's not just a happy ending, it's a hopeful one. Because it reminds us that even after unimaginable loss, love can be rebuilt, one honest day at a time.